U.S. trading partners around the world are threatening retaliation against these new tariffs, which slap a 25% tax on steel imports, 10% on aluminum. The president defending the measure on Twitter, saying, and I quote, "When a country is losing many billions of dollars on trade with virtually every country it does business with, trade wars are good and easy to win." But some investors disagree. But like I said, we are recovering. We'll see how this all shakes out here, because we're just down 161 points after having tumbled more significantly earlier. We'll see how it goes. It's Friday, and it's 2 o'clock Eastern. Here's the thing, the president has always been talking about this, right? For years he's been talking about this. He has said it is not fair. We are getting taken advantage of, and we need free trade and fair trade. So why is anybody surprised, including the market, that he's actually doing what he said he would do? Is this just another Wall Street overreaction? Here with me, Moody's chief economist John Lonski, Kingsview Asset Management CIO Scott Martin, along with our own Nicole Petalitas down on the floor of the NYSE. And Nicole, I'm going to start with you because it looks like we're recovering, dare I say, down only 155 here, recovering a bit. Are investors waking up to the idea that maybe they perhaps, just perhaps, overreacted?
Yeah, there's actually the mood on Wall Street is that it was an overreaction, big picture. I mean, basically, we've had nothing less than a 300-point day all week long. We've also had other pieces of news, including what our new Fed head, Jay Powell, has said about being obviously moving forward with those gradual rate hikes, and we're looking at 3 or 4 rate hikes. As far as the reaction to what we saw pertaining to tariffs for steel and aluminum, there were some concerns about Boeing and Caterpillar and raw material costs, but big picture, that international trade war. When you walk around this trading floor, most of the guys seem to say they think it's a negotiating tactic. There's still uncertainty about the whole thing. They are not particularly worried at this time, and it's really evidence when you were down 391 points and now down just 164. So the world has not come to an end.
No, it hasn't come to an end. And, I've said over and over and over again on this show that we need to get tough with China. China's stealing our technology. China is basically deflating its own currency so that it can sell more stuff over here. And then, of course, they're subsidizing their steel industry and their aluminum industry. And if we want to compete, we should be competing on a level playing field. Not to mention, of course, what we're dealing with North Korea, the crazy man there. China could quietly make him go off into the corner. They haven't done so. In fact, they've continued to trade with North Korea. We get some economic power. Maybe it's time we use it. And this is an example of such. But economists like John Lonski aren't convinced. You're still worried. You think Smoot-Hawley, you think 1930s all over again. Tell me why this makes you nervous.
Well, you have to worry about this. First of all, these tariffs are going to hurt those many U.S. businesses that use steel and aluminum when producing output. It makes them less globally competitive. I think the other big worry is this a sign of things to come? Are we going to see more tariffs imposed? Are we going to see more restrictions on trade put in place? If that's the case, the U.S. consumer is going to be worse off. We're going to be facing higher prices for goods of lower quality. I don't think that's necessarily going to happen, but there is reason for concern.
Sometimes when I speak to groups, I love to show this chart of imports and exports, basically our trade deficit over the last, 50 years. And one of the scary things is that you see that really starting in the 1970s, we began importing, and this just accelerated, more than we exported, John. And alongside that, if you track that compared with wages, you also see that wages really haven't gone anywhere for the last 30 years.
There's a story within a story there, and that is we have lost our global competitiveness. If your trade deficit is widening, that's one of the best, most reliable indicators that you are falling behind globally. And one area we have fallen behind globally is in education. When you look at rankings of countries by aptitude in mathematics, what are we, 10th or 15th? That's ridiculously low considering the level of wealth in this country.
Look, I just don't think it's a good recipe right now. We're so far behind in education. We're obviously not putting people into the workforce that are going to be able to work as engineers or programmers, and yet we're taking away all the jobs that they could have worked in.
Well,
I got to get Scott in here, too, so hang tight to that thought. Scott,
Well,
do you
Trish,
feel any
there's also a
differently
worker
about this? Because
shortage.
I'm concerned right now that, we're going through some kind of structural shift, and we haven't done anything to help the people that might be left behind. And now, finally, Donald Trump is saying, okay, maybe we need to rethink some of these deals that have not benefited the middle class. He's doing so, and the market freaks out. Although I'm going to use freaked out because, again, in past tense, we're only down 115 now. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, and the other thing is, Trish, we obviously want to make more stuff here. That's no joke. But the reality is that's a process. You can't just throw tariffs out there and leave trade agreements and all of a sudden see the U.S. make the stuff that we import, to John's point. Now, you made a good point earlier. A lot of these countries have used currency manipulation to take advantage of trade, which that needs to stop. So if that's the tough talk from Trump that gets them to stop doing that, that's a good thing. With respect to workers, though, you talk to a lot of companies around the U.S., there's a shortage of workers. You mentioned the education. That's another problem with respect to some of the high-paying jobs out there are not getting filled because we don't have the educational background to do it.
Nicole, again, I think people are sort of allowing this news to sink in. Were they that surprised yesterday? I mean, the president has telegraphed this time and time again. He said that he will get tough on China, that we must get tough on China, that we need fair trade, and yet everybody acts like, oh my gosh, who saw this one coming?
I don't think they were surprised by the fact that he was talking about tariffs. I think they were surprised at how he just sort of blurted it out. I mean, I heard one trader saying exactly that phrase. They thought it would be a little more tactical about the delivery on the whole thing, but they knew it was coming, and they really, truly consider him a real negotiator. So they think that this is a way to negotiate against China, other countries. We know the European Union, for example. Now we have to worry about retaliation, retribution. Like, that is where we're going to have to worry about. By the way, the Russell, the small caps, those are up 1.2%. So not everything is bad on Wall Street right now.
Yeah, well, NAFTA's coming up for negotiation, John, and one of the concerns, at least Steve Forbes voiced this to me yesterday, is that, this may be setting a trend as we move forward. 700,000 people have lost their jobs. And I don't know if it's a result of NAFTA, but it certainly coincided with NAFTA. And there's less manufacturing here than there used to be. I mean, is there any way we can bring that stuff back?
Probably not. We have to realize we're an advanced economy. We have a higher standard of living than they do in Mexico. So we have to produce things that are commensurate with a higher standard of living.
Because,
higher value-added
I keep using this example. My husband's from the Buffalo area. I kind of think that maybe back 50s, 60s, 70s, they had a better standard of living there than they do today. And there's many small towns and communities all across America. Detroit's another example.
When I broke into the workforce back in the 1970s, I wasn't competing with workers from China and India. They weren't part of the game. They're far less expensive. I've been told by people, why should I hire an engineer from the United States? I can go to Eastern Europe, pay them $25,000, $30,000, and they're happy and they're very good workers. It's a whole different world. And that is correct. And that's why you have to go at that end of the production.
We haven't done anything to protect these people, though. No. Nothing. I mean,
okay.
You know who gets rewarded in this? Globalists,
yes.
And investors, right? The big companies that are seeking profitability, they're rewarded by finding cheaper labor.
Those of us do have jobs that benefit from globalization are made better off, and perhaps that's why we're not, as sensitive as we should be to these issues that now affect a lot of
if you were working at one of those
America.
Factories that relocated to Mexico, you'd feel a whole lot differently.
Lower regulation.
Less regulation, lower taxes. That is the prescription.
That's right,
for success,
and that's why they're moving, guys. That's why they're moving.
I know they're moving that, but then they got this little thing going on the side too. And I'm just thinking that it's maybe not as bad as everyone is interpreting it to be. And I think the market is starting to recognize that. Down 130 right now. John, Scott, Nicole, thank you. Let's get more on these tariffs.